I am welcoming Professor Shai Feldman in the Raymond Frankel Professor of Israeli Politics and Society at the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis University. Shai, we really need help with the Middle East. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Okay. First of all, there is a former military intelligence guy that is a regular contributor to the morning show here on this station. And he is convinced that in the next 30 days or less, we are going to be making some sort of military strike against Iran. Now, because he was military intelligence, one might be led to believe that maybe he has sources. Is there a situation that you see in the Middle East that would call for this? What would, if this sort of thing is actually being talked about, why? What would it be designed to accomplish?
Well, the situation the situation that he's talking about actually doesn't come from the Middle East. It comes from Washington, D.C. It comes from the fact that President Trump sent a letter that he wrote to the leadership of Iran, and he basically gave them a time frame for entering into negotiations regarding their nuclear efforts. And so the stopwatch is coming from Washington, D.C., and not necessarily from the region itself, because there's nothing dramatically new that's happened in the region that can explain, let's say, this kind of a time frame of expecting something within the next month or two. Iran's efforts to develop a nuclear capability has been going on for a long time now. And it reached a point where both Israeli and U.S. Intelligence agencies have essentially labeled Iran as a nuclear threshold state. And a nuclear threshold state means that it's accumulated enough fissile material, which is to say material from which you can actually make a bomb, that allows them to create a bomb in a matter of months, and it would take them a little longer to create a warhead for this bomb, but they're clearly over. But that's nothing new. So that there's nothing new there.
So there's nothing that Iran is on the verge of doing that we need to stop. This is just Donald Trump throwing his weight around.
Well, no, it's actually an effort on his part to get them actually to seriously negotiate, and in a sense, in that way, put a stop to this to the race to accumulate a nuclear capability. But we have to remember, or at least I think, that that the motivation is not to launch another war in the Middle East. I think President Trump, I think, has made it clear on a number of different instances that he does not like the idea of war, that his idea is that the war is bad for business, and he's trying to end wars like the one in Ukraine rather than to begin new ones. So it's not as if President Trump woke up one morning in January 21 and decided to go to war with Iran. He, I think, sees the trajectory as leading there, and he's trying to stop this trajectory by essentially coercing Iran to come back to the negotiation table. So I think the motivation, I can understand the apprehension, because, of course, if Iran completely ignores President Trump or ignores his letter, then we may find ourselves in this situation. But frankly speaking, I don't see the Iranian leaders, that enthusiastic about, running into a war with the United States. It is still the most potent, robust superpower in the world, and I don't think the Iranians are looking for a fight with the U.S.
I don't know how high-level negotiations are conducted, but I was always under the impression that you had the best success with negotiations when you could convince the other side that it really was in their best interest, that there were pluses for them to be in agreement with you, economic pluses, other kinds of pluses, as opposed to saying, oh, by the way, if you don't start negotiating with us, I don't know, we might drop a few bombs. It doesn't seem to. There's also the possibility that if something like that happens, the Iranians are just going to dig in their heels. I don't understand how that even the threat of military action is the best way to go here. Am I missing something?
Well, I'm not sure you're missing something, but I would say this. I think he's counting on Iran knowing. First of all, he's counting on the fact that Iran right now is in a situation of relative weakness, especially compared to how we saw Iran, say, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, in the sense that this whole axis of resistance that it's actually put together, that during the couple of years, mostly during the last couple of years before Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7. So mostly in 2020, 21, 22, and 2023 until October. This was a formidable axis, first of all, because of Iran itself, and because they built up Hamas, they built up Hezbollah in Lebanon, and so there's and then the Houthis in Yemen, which are still there, and still reminding everybody that they're still there, and so on and so forth. So Iran built a formidable axis of countries, and that's which, of course, threatened the U.S. interests, threatened Israel. In fact, on October 7th, went on the attack right after Hamas attacked Israel. Hezbollah joined. The groups in pro-Iranian groups from Iraq joined. The Houthis in Yemen joined, and so on and so forth. That axis is much, much, much weaker than it was on October 7, 2023, because Israel fought back. Hamas is now with a fraction of the capabilities that it had when it attacked on October 7. The same applies to Hezbollah, and more than that, Hezbollah lost its very, very charismatic leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Iran, all of its efforts to attack Israel directly were thwarted by a counter-axis that the United States successfully built, and the Israeli Air Force had essentially penetrated the Iranian airspace. So the Iranians know that Israel, and clearly the U.S., that is much more capable than Israel of reaching the nuclear facilities, are there, and they're much, much weaker, and so on and so forth. So I think that Iran right now is at the point of relative weakness. That's number one. Number two, economically, it's in terrible, terrible, terrible shape. And you see this with the conversion rate of the Iranian currency, and they know that there is a lot of economic benefits that are there waiting, because the U.S. doesn't want a war with Iran, and the Europeans don't want a war with Iran. So it's not as if President Trump is counting only on threats. He's also counting on the fact that the Iranians know that there are benefits from moving away from its status right now as a nuclear threshold state to the negotiation table. Now, it is true that on the other hand, and this goes back to what you knew about negotiations, is that President Trump, there is another facet to President Trump's strategy. President Trump, when he sees something that's not moving anywhere, that is kind of frozen, because the parties aren't showing, willingness to let's say, rethink their position and be a little more flexible to allow an agreement to take place. I think he thinks of this as a very, very high tree, where the fruits are very, very high, and there's no ladder that with which you can reach the fruits. So what he's trying to do is like shake the tree with as much force as he can, so that some of these fruits will fall, and where they will fall and when they will fall. I mean, in his view, this creates new opportunities. So the issue is how to get out of situations that are frozen to create a new reality of much more, let's say, liquidity, so that it would allow negotiations to be fruitful.
I'm talking to Professor Shai Feldman, who is a professor of Israeli politics and society at Brandeis University. We are going to take a break. And when we come back, Shai, I want to talk to you about what is going on in Israel right now, the protests that we're seeing. We'll be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
Joining me is Professor Shai Feldman, the Raymond Frankel Professor of Israeli Politics and Society at Brandeis University. And what is going on the streets of Israel these days?
Well, what's going on is that thousands and thousands, into the lower hundreds of thousands, are in the streets protesting a number of developments that they see as a threat to Israeli democracy. There's actually two kinds of different issues involved here. One is the issue of the future of Israeli democracy, and the other issue is the issues of war and peace, particularly in terms of what continues to go on, especially between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. On the first front, the Israeli government tried this like a year before Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. It began then. In early 2023, the government tried to change the balance of power between the executive, which is to say the government, and the legislative branch of the Israeli government, versus the judiciary, to weaken the judiciary so that the executives and the legislature could do more and without be constrained by the judiciary. This basically was kind of dormant after October 7, but in the last few weeks, the government has revived its efforts to make these changes, and essentially, and how did it try to do this? It tried to do this by essentially trying to weaken at least 2.5 of the gatekeepers of Israeli democracy, which is one, the Supreme Court, which is a very robust, in Israel's case, defender of democracy, and also tried to fire the head of the Israeli General Security Services, which is the Israeli equivalent of the FBI. It also tried to, now there's legislation in the Israeli parliament about this. It also tried to change the way in which judges, and which includes Supreme Court judges, get nominated. Again, at the expense of, let's say, more public personalities and much more in favor of politicians, who would play a bigger role in the selection of Israeli judges, and including Supreme Court judges, which is actually on this issue. It's not, even after they are trying to do what they're trying to do and change that, it's not going to be that different from the way that judges are nominated or elected here in the U.S., which is to say a large degree of political involvement. The public sees these moves, including the effort to fire the director of General Security Services, and also to fire the Attorney General of Israel, which is what the government's trying to do, as essentially threatening all the most important gatekeepers of Israeli democracy, and they're out in the streets to protest that and to prevent that. And this is now going up to the Supreme Court to decide whether what the government is doing is legal or not. If the Supreme Court decides that it's not legal and will rule that these moves are not legal, and the government will decide to ignore the Supreme Court decisions, then Israel will find itself in the most extreme constitutional crisis in its history, because this would be a head-to-head battle between the Supreme Court on one side and the politicians on the other side. So that's one issue that's bringing most of the people on the streets now. But there is a second issue, and the second issue is, again, an issue that is being debated in Israel since the war began, since October 7, 2023, and that is what comes first, defeating Hamas or putting all the efforts first on the issue of trying to release the hostages, the Israeli hostages that Hamas is holding. And now the government has decided not to continue implementation of a ceasefire agreement that was negotiated by both the Biden administration and Trump administration. The two teams actually cooperated together in the weeks leading to President Trump's inauguration on reaching this ceasefire agreement, which included hostage release. The Israeli government both sides implemented phase one of this agreement. The Israeli government decided not to enter negotiations on the implementation of phase two. That's too technical. The most important aspect of all of this is that the process that towards a ceasefire has stopped, and as a result of that, the war, in a sense, the fighting has been renewed. And thousands and thousands of the people, among the hundreds of thousands that are in the street now, are basically out in the street because they think that the number one priority of Israel on this front should be the release of hostages. And Israel should not have renewed the fire, and they are opposed now to the continuation of the fire and are actually trying to persuade the government that it has to go back to implement an agreement that would allow more of the hostages to be freed.
You keep saying that they're reacting to what the government is doing. Is it simply Benjamin Netanyahu, or because when I read about these things here in the United States, it seems like Benjamin Netanyahu is synonymous with the government. You know, it's, well, Benjamin Netanyahu's doing this or saying this or wants this. Is he really the person behind all this or not?
So the answer is yes. On what we discussed in the last few minutes, he is the man, in the sense that there's nobody in the party that questions his leadership. If you wish, it's a situation that's not so different from the Republican Party and President Trump.
I've always thought they were two of a kind.
Well, maybe, and also maybe they talk to each other a lot, and maybe they try to learn from each other's experience. So the answer is yes. Now, where I think the media sometimes makes or confuses things is between, not so much between the Israeli government on one side and Netanyahu on the other side, because they're the same. However, where sometimes the media confuses is between the government, which includes Netanyahu on one side, and Israel, generally speaking. And Israel is not Netanyahu and is not the government. There are in Israel almost everything is debated, like the tens of thousands of people on the street now that are debating the issue of what comes first, what should be the priorities, and they're advocating against the government that the priority should be the release of the hostage and so on. Throughout, if you take this period of since the war began, which was 17 months ago, there's an ongoing debate between the political level, which includes Netanyahu and led by Netanyahu on one side, and some of the leadership of the Israeli defense community, including the Israeli Defense Forces, who are taking issue with certain decisions that Netanyahu is leading to, and so on and so forth. This is where I think confusion needs to be avoided. When people hear on the media, Israel did this, Israel did that, you have to also ask, okay, is this all of Israel is behind this, and who exactly in Israel is behind this, and so on and so forth. So that's where the nuances are very important.
You mentioned the possibility that if the court rulings go against the government of Israel, that the possibility exists that they would try to ignore or circumvent the courts. We are also very worried about that with Donald Trump, who seems to at least have people in his administration who don't think that court rulings necessarily have to be followed. In Israel, if the government gets a court ruling that goes against it in some way and chooses to defy it, what will happen?
Well, that's being discussed as we talk, because first of all, because the most important reason why these tens and tens, if not, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people are in the streets now, is precisely to avoid getting to that point. To tell the government, no, if you do this, if you dare ignore the decisions of the Supreme Court. To use a term that President Trump appears to like is the gates of hell will open. So and also so what is in this case? What's the translation of the gates of hell? Well, there are already discussions by the business community and also the trade unions to call for a general strike. The presidents of Israeli universities have said we'll close the university because we, the faculty and the students, will go out to the streets and so on and so forth. So basically the threat right now, and it's being discussed now, it's in preparation. It's warning the government. It's in preparation to the possibility that the government will dare do that, and it's telling the government this will have a price and a major price, and especially this is coming from the business community, the economic circles, because they know that an important element of Israel's economic success is the sense outside Israel that Israel is a stable country, and especially in terms of foreign investments in Israel and so on, Israel's economic relations with Europe, and so on and so forth. And basically, what they're signaling to the Israeli government is, if you dare avoid abiding by the Supreme Court decisions, nobody is going to look at Israel as a stable place, and that will affect the whole question of Israel's the robustness of Israeli economy. So they're signaling already what the price will be in an effort to try to persuade the government to prevent getting to that point.
Shai, this has been so important a conversation to have, and I really appreciate you sharing with us what's going on and your insights into it. I hope that you will come back again, because obviously this is a situation that is constantly changing and evolving, and I'd love to be able to talk to you going forward about what you see happening.
I'll be happy whenever you would like to do that. I'll be happy to help.
Thank you. I am going to take you up on that, and I appreciate the fact that you are volunteering, if you will, volunteering to join us and educate us as well as your students. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I was just talking with Shai Feldman, Raymond Frankel Chair in Israeli Politics and Society at Brandeis University.